Okay, class, good morning. These are going to be your final exams. I'm going to start with your LITS 100. Okay, so make sure that you speed build on your own. This is going to be your LIT 100. Proper names, you have Airbnb, Starbucks, buy one, get one free, and American. This is going to be 100 LIT number 1, final exam for 5 minutes, you all. Do you ever have the sinking feeling that most of the world is better at planning than you are? Welcome to the club. Most people who do well at planning still don't do well when it comes to planning for the future. With the nation in a constant state of economic crisis, more people than ever are going into debt in order to survive month to month. More people than ever are using credit cards to pay all their bills and are still unable to make ends meet at the end of the month. The number of Americans in debt is growing. Jobs are hard to come by unless you are skilled in one particular type of work or can live on minimum wage. Although the minimum wage isn't as low as it used to be, depending where you live, it is still difficult to live on. If you have been trying to plan for your retirement, you may want to think about putting it off a while longer. If you are already retired and the money is tight, you need to figure out how you can reduce your monthly spending or start looking for a part-time job to help you during the hard times. There's no time like the present to examine your monthly spending to see what you can cut out. The first thing you can do to save money each month is to curb your spending. Unless you have the cash on hand, this could mean you cut back on vacations. Think about spending time closer to home and taking day trips from there. You might consider postponing any vacations for a year or two while you pay off a credit card. Being in credit card debt is extremely stressful, and the sooner you can eliminate the debt, the better. If a lot of your hard-earned money goes toward eating out, consider cooking at home more often, and by all means, stop buying coffee every day at Starbucks. Watch for food items that you used to go on sale and then buy them in bulk. As long as you have the storage space, buying in bulk can help stretch a dollar. If you live in a small space or have limited storage, take advantage of the buy one, get one deals with a friend or family member by splitting the price. Watch out for impulse spending by not food shopping on an empty stomach. Eat a meal before you go to the store, or at least carry a snack with you in case hunger strikes. More people these days are renting out parts of their house or apartment to go overnight as guests on Airbnb in order to make ends meet. If your space is large enough, consider renting out an extra room. If you live near a college or university, it's possible to make even more money by renting out your living room to a student. Many students are even willing to share rooms, and then we have your second 100. None. No proper names, okay? This is going to be your 100 lit number 2 for 5 minutes. We live in a pressure cooker of being busy almost all of the time. In this country, the majority of people have way too much to do in this day and age, or so it seems. How much of our business do we heap on ourselves? And how much of it is real? If you think about the frantic pace of our lives, you might see that a lot of what we feel that we have to do is really just making sure we keep up with what we think of as the rest of society. We get caught up in the frantic pace of life. We are so busy keeping busy that many of us have forgotten how to relax and slow down the pace and take time out to enjoy life and to smell the roses, so to speak. We feel pushed and pulled by social and economic pressure to spend our lives working to pay for all of the things we have come to believe that we need. Then what happens is that all of the things we own begin to own us instead of us owning them. We find ourselves in an endless circle of working and spending and working to pay for all of our things. And we don't even have the time to enjoy them because we are so busy working to pay for them. The end result of all of this, of course, is that if we are not careful, our lives start feeling empty and void of meaning. It is critical that we find our way to a better understanding of what we want out of life. Other things, or other than things that we can buy at a store, and how to go about having a life that we can fully enjoy. A life in which we have time to relax and to be with our families and to just simply be. How many of us ever allow ourselves to stop our frantic pace and go outside and sit still and think, or even better, to go outside and sit still and not think? How many of us allow ourselves to ever do that? The good news is that there is hope. Two well-known time consultants, yes, there is such a job as being a time consultant, suggests that the way to bring our lives back under control, to feel that we own our things rather than feeling that they own us, is to stop counting every single second of our time and to try to change how we feel and think about our time. In other words, to work out a new relationship with the time we have. According to these experts, most adults in our country have a lot more free time today than they had in years past. Studies on the subject show that adults today have about 5 times more free time than they did in the past, to be precise. Now, that doesn't factor in parents. And then we've got your 80s. 80 number 1, proper names: Kentucky, Washington, Florence, Auntie Florence, Faye, Auntie Faye, and Newport, and John Adams. This is going to be 80 lit number 1 for 5 minutes, final exam. 80 number 1 lit, proper names: Kentucky, Washington, Florence, Auntie Florence, Faye, Auntie Faye, and Newport, and John Adams for 5 minutes. When I was a little girl, I was really fortunate to grow up in a big family with lots of women of many generations, living in the same house with my parents and me. When my sisters and I were little, we lived for half of the year in Kentucky, and for the other half of the year, we would live in Washington. Our house in Kentucky was right next door to a house that one of my aunties lived in. Her name was Florence, and she was old, but still very active and full of life. She liked me and my sisters to stay with her on the weekends, and she would make us popcorn over from the fireplace and serve it to us in warm dishes with lots of butter on it. She didn't have a television, so we read books when we were at her house. She loved to read to us, and many of my childhood memories are about Auntie Florence reading to us and the smell of buttered popcorn. My grandma lived in the house too, and so did another one of my aunties named Faye. When my Auntie Faye moved out of that house and bought her own house, the family tried to get her to change her mind and stay. They tried to get my mom to put a stop to her moving out. But when my mom saw the house, she fell in love with it, and now she lives in it too. The house my Auntie Faye owns is right smack in the middle of the woods. And there are lots of animals near it that come up close sometimes. At night, if you are very quiet and all of the lights are off, you can hear the animals out in the yard. Anyhow, that is how I grew up, with lots of women and family and animals. When I went off to college, I decided to read all I could about women and their role in history. One woman who really caught my fancy was a 19th century writer and reporter by the name of Anne Newport. There is a story about her that still makes me laugh to this day. John Adams would not be interviewed by her no matter what. He did not want to have anything to do with a woman reporter. One day, he went swimming. And then we have your 80 number 2 final lit, Jim, Griffith, Jim, eBay, Onus. And this is going to be 80 lit number 2 for 5 minutes. Many people have never heard the name Jim Griffin before, and most people have no idea who he is and what he stands for. Jim joined eBay in 1996 as the company's first support rep. And in the years since then, he has helped hire and train new people to work at eBay and has written a book on how to sell on eBay. He has lots of years of experience, and his book is an easy read with a lot of hands-on advice for those looking to make money on eBay. Not everyone who tries it ends up making money, but there are now a lot of people who can support themselves through eBay sales. In his new book, Jim offers tips on how to get your new company off on the right track. One of the first things he addresses in the book is how to start up and keep going. The first thing he advises is that if you want to sell on eBay, it is better to move slowly than to try to do too much at once and sell to many kinds of things at once. He suggests writing out a plan with the idea in mind that you aren't going to jump into things all at once. He suggests that there is always a learning curve when it comes to just about anything new, and that when it comes to selling on eBay to make a living or to supplement your income, it's best to take your time and really think things through. It's easy to get overwhelmed with sales and the residual work involved. And eBay operates in part from the positive reviews of satisfied customers. He advises that before you begin, make a few purchases yourself on eBay so that you become more familiar with the site. You need to understand the buying model before you start up your own business. Look at the sites that are flourishing and model yours after them. Selling on eBay involves more than the obvious posting of pictures and descriptions of items. You may find you need bubble wrap, envelopes, tape, stamps, and boxes. You may need a quiet space to work in. You may need more time than you expected in which to prepare and ship orders. Make your listing look as professional as possible, and it will instill confidence in a buyer. The onus is on, and we'll get ready for your jury charges, okay? I'll continue on this video. So we have on your jury charges, number 1, 100. None, no proper names, okay? This is going to be 100, number 1, jury charge final exam for 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are instructed that there is no one single factor that can answer the question as to whether the defendant was in actual physical control of the vehicle or whether she was just a passive occupant in the vehicle. You are to look at all of the circumstances, but some of the following may be helpful in your determination of the truth of the matter. When the defendant was discovered in her vehicle, was she awake or asleep? What was the position of the defendant's vehicle when it was found? Was the vehicle's engine running? Was the defendant sitting in the driver's seat of the vehicle? If she was, what was her position in the driver's seat of the vehicle? Was the defendant the only person in the vehicle? Did the defendant have the key to the car in her possession? Lastly, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how did the vehicle get to where it was found? If you find from a review of the circumstances beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was in actual physical control of the vehicle, along with all of the other factors of the offense, then you must return a verdict of guilty. But if you have a reasonable doubt as to whether she was in actual physical control of the vehicle, then you are to return a verdict of not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, except for talking with your fellow jurors about the case when you are back in the jury room to deliberate, you will not talk to anyone in any way about the case. You will not let anyone else try to talk to you about the merits of the case or anything at all to do with it. This includes talking to your own family members or people you work with. This includes the press and the media and all of the people who are involved in the trial. This includes talking about the case in person, and it also includes talking about the case in writing or talking about the case on the phone or via email or blog or any other such feature. If you are asked about the case, or if someone approaches you in any manner about your jury service or anything at all regarding the case, you are to respond that you have been ordered by the court that you are not to discuss the matter and to report the contact to the court. Do not read anything about the case or the people and places involved in it, and do not listen to any news or media account about the case or anything to do with it. Do not make any kind of investigation into the case or the people and places involved in it, or in any other way. Try to learn about the case on your own. The law requires these rules to ensure that the parties in the case have and then we have your 100 number 2 jury charge. It says English and the court. Remember, cap the court on this last one when you can replace judge in the sentence. This is going to be 100 number 2 jury charge for 5 minutes. You must not be biased against any witness because of his or her race or religion, his or her sexual preference or country of origin, or his or her trouble speaking English, as we discussed during the jury selection. Everyone, including me, has feelings and assumptions, and those gut feelings, we refer to those as implicit biases, and they are mostly things that we may not even be aware of. These hidden things can and do impact what we see and hear, how we recall the things we see and hear, and how we make our decisions in life. Because you are making very important decisions in this case, I encourage each and every one of you to look very carefully at all of the evidence and to resist jumping to conclusions that are based on your personal likes and dislikes. the law demands that a jury return a verdict that is just and one that is based only on the evidence and your evaluation of the evidence. You are to use your reason and common sense and these instructions to you by the court to reach your verdict. Our justice system is counting on you to be fair and impartial and not to let any bias or prejudice you have play any role in this. Your verdict is to be reached without discrimination on your part. In reaching the verdict, you are not to consider the defendant's race or religion or country of birth or what gender the defendant is, because it is of the utmost importance to be impartial to all parties in this case. The verdict form you will be given has a certification page that states what I have just stated to you. Each of you must carefully read the statement and then sign your name in the appropriate place as long as the statement reflects how you reached your verdict. In a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But in civil trials such as this one, the party who is required to prove something only has to prove that it is more likely to be true than not true. We call this a preponderance of the evidence. The plaintiff has the burden of proving every element of the plaintiff's claim by a preponderance of the evidence, which means that the evidence as a whole leads you to feel that something is more likely true than not true. To put it differently, if you were to put the plaintiff's and the defendant's evidence on opposite sides of a scale, the party with the burden of proof would have to make the scale tip slightly in its favor. If you determine that the evidence is evenly balanced on any one issue, the party with the burden of proof on that issue has failed to establish it by a preponderance of the evidence. In determining whether any fact in the case has been proved by a preponderance of the and then we have your 80s. And so you have on your 80 number 1 jury charge no proper names, okay? This is going to be 80 jury charge number 1, final exam for 5 minutes, you all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, counsel. This has been a long trial, and I know that you are all relieved to have reached this final stage of the proceeding. I do thank you for the patience you have shown throughout the trial and for the careful attention you have given to the court proceedings. This has been a high-profile case with a lot of attention paid to it by the media, and I appreciate the discretion you have demonstrated in not allowing the cameras or the press to disturb you. I know there were times that you were tempted to talk about the case with family and friends, and perhaps even the press. And I appreciate that you abided by the code of silence that you took. It is now your duty to determine if the plaintiff has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant was indeed negligent. If to your thinking that burden was not met by the plaintiff, you will then be deciding in favor of the defendant. If to your thinking the plaintiff has met that burden, you will move on to the next step, which is to determine whether or not the plaintiff has also proven that she was free from contributory negligence. Should all of you agree that the plaintiff has met that burden and has proven herself to be free from any contributory negligence, then you will next move on to the issue of damages. The damages to be awarded in this final stage of the trial are to be only for the monetary loss suffered by the plaintiff. You cannot allow any damages for the emotional pain and suffering that may have been caused due to this incident, insofar as money can do it. A plaintiff is to receive a fair and just compensation for all injuries and losses which are legally caused by the defendant's conduct. Under this rule of law, the point of an award of damages isn't to punish the defendant for his or her negligence, but to compensate the plaintiff. The law has certain rules to govern the award of damages. Some of them may require math and a calculator, but others can be determined by using your good common sense. In this case, the plaintiff was seeking to recover damages for the time that she lost from work due to having to and then you've got your 80 jury charge number 2. It says no proper names, okay? I see state, capitalize it. When you can replace prosecution, state, capitalize it. This is going to be test number 2 for 5 minutes, jury charge 80 number 2. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there are 3 basic rules of law in a criminal case. There is the presumption of innocence. This first rule of law means that the defendant in a criminal case is always presumed to be innocent of the crime or crimes charged unless or until proven guilty. the presumption of innocence alone is enough to acquit a defendant. The indictment brought against the defendant is an accusation and only that. It is not proof of anything at all. The defendant is presumed innocent unless you decide unanimously that the state has proven her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The second rule of law that applies in all criminal cases is that the burden of proof is on the state to prove the defendant guilty. The state has the burden of proof throughout the trial, and the defendant never has the burden to prove her innocence or to produce any evidence or to testify on her own behalf. The law does not allow a jury to consider the fact that a defendant did or did not testify on her own behalf as being proof of her guilt. The third rule of law, ladies and gentlemen, is that the state must prove each element of the crime or crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the kind of proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. It isn't necessary that the state prove guilt beyond all possible doubt, because that is seldom possible. A reasonable doubt is based on common sense and reason, and it is not based on speculation or guessing. It is a doubt in your mind that comes from a careful consideration of all of the evidence in the case, or from the lack of evidence in the case. The evidence with which you are to decide the case comes in three forms. There is the sworn testimony of the witnesses, both on direct and cross-examination, regardless of who called the witness to the stand. There is the exhibits that the court has received into evidence. And there is the facts that the attorneys have agreed on and have been stipulated to by the court. During the course of the trials, the attorneys have a duty to their client to object when they feel that a question isn't proper under the rules of evidence. You are not to. Okay, and so that's it, you all. So tomorrow we have Q&A. Make sure that you all type these up if you need them, and that you access your speed building and EV360. I will send you emails as far as when to register and stuff, but you have Q&A still tomorrow, okay? Have a great day, you all.